Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's Wargame Weekly. I'm John Caspian.
I'm John Galvin.
That was quite a delay I just had in my own brain. It might be the allergies that are happening now that it's under 30 degrees outside
Yeah. Uh,
in November.
I mean, you're up in Ohio. We're down in Georgia. Um, the rules of the weather are all made up anyway. So
It's all messed up. But what's not messed up is epic list building
yeah,
and considering strategical placement of units in your army. So no matter what game you play, you can always have good list building that doesn't necessarily take into account like the perfect points for values and all this stuff, right?
right.
So one of the things I've noticed when I'm playing against people here locally in Cincinnati is just like either they're super casual like me, who I'm just trying to have fun and try out new things, or they'll be really like meta oriented, where they want to take everything that's perfect in terms of points and all that. So, for you, John, how do you think about units strategically, like having what proportion of different types of units inside your army?
So I actually take a usually like a balance of roles is what I look for. So depending on the game that I'm playing, there's generally some sort of objective, right? Like, and I'm not talking about like little objective markers on the board. It's either seizing a point, taking a point, um, getting up on your straight up murder ball, killing your opponents. Um, and so I try to take into account units or models that fulfill a particular role that I want to have completed on the battlefield. And I feel like that's a usually a much better way of thinking about things as opposed to the like points trades where it's like, okay, well, I know this 500 points of dudes can usually take back 750 points, right? Um, where when I go to rolls, I'm like, okay, well, I need something durable to hold a point, like it's an object like actual like multiple points on the board that I have to hold, so I have to say, well, I need multiple durable units to hold those points, and then I need the pieces to support them. um, and then it also goes into play style. I usually like really kind of meaty lists that have a lot of attrition in them. So the more I can outlast my opponents, and the pieces that give me that ability are what I usually lean towards. So like, things with lots of hit points or things with some sort of defensive ability that lets me kind of weather some storms. Um,
That actually fits perfectly on my first suggestion, which is there's two major ways I like to think about it. Excuse me, good old tree allergies. Number one is basic stat lines, right?
mhm.
So then, like just like what you're saying, if you have a high hit point or like high resistance model, like in 40K, you have your death guard, and they're slow but they're tough, and so that's your number one thing you can consider. But number two is special abilities slash synergies. So then, with me, if I'm building out an army, I like to think about what roles my first models are in, my basic models, the ones that fill up a lot of my force. So if you're playing a lot of bikes for custodies, for instance, you know you're fast and you put out a lot of wounds, but they don't necessarily hold everything down because they have a 4-up invulnerable instead of a 3-up like the regular custodians can have.
Right.
So a lot of considerations you want to have is those synergies. Now, what are some good synergies for armies that you've built recently?
So synergies that I look for, once again, like going for attrition based gameplay, or like support for that. So if I'm playing, I've been practicing my Trog herd for our upcoming GigaCon tournament. And one of the things that I discovered quickly, I just had a lot of Trogs on the list. So trolls that regen every turn. They all have high hit points. They're pretty durable. I really enjoy it, but they didn't have a way of getting across the board in a reasonable amount of time. So what I ended up doing was putting in some spellcasters in the list that gave them movement based spells. So that's a synergy that I really like. It kind of makes up for a shortcoming in the Trog list, um, and gets me to be able to like spread across the board much better than I would without it. Now,
Well, that's interesting because that's like a big thing that I think when people are doing one-on-one comparisons of units,
yeah,
or even of big armies with their meta considerations, they don't think about those little things. Like if you think about a bike or a horse or cavalry, that's always a traditional consideration in war games, right?
right.
So it's the flanking unit and all this stuff. But are there ways you can minimize weaknesses in certain units that you like a lot,
Yeah,
depending on your playstyle?
and so like it goes into kind of what Justin was talking about. I picked the Trogs because I really enjoy the models, and so that was one of the things that led me to build this list. But after playing it, it was like, okay, great. Like I like this list. It plays relatively close to how I want it to play, but it has some very obvious weaknesses in it. And so finding the like I wouldn't even necessarily call it like a synergy, because it's not them working in tandem together to create a new effect, but it's almost like a stopgap or a reinforcement to a unit that I bank on. Like so like uh, similar to they always talk about like if you put all of your eggs in one basket, like if something comes across that likes that one particular egg or that one particular basket, you put yourself in a bad spot. And so adding pieces to my list to make up for shortcomings like that is really special and definitely something that I usually have to play test a list several times to figure out one what the proposed weakness is, and then yes, is it a weakness, and then how do I fight against it? So
Right, because it's hyper specialization
yeah,
versus like what is it? Take all
yeah, yeah,
opponents, whatever.
yeah. It comes to the ski list versus the like all comers list, right? So
All comers. That's the one.
Um, but yeah, so like when I'm list building, it's not necessarily just the points, right? Like, I mean, points are always a factor because that's what you're using to build your army. Uh, but if you look at it from the outside, some stuff, in the grand scheme of things, might be like, oh man, that's a really high point cost for something that does no damage. Well, it may not be there to do damage, right? Like the fact that it is like the Ossiarch Bone Reapers that are just coming out this weekend. Things like the Bone Shaper. You look at them and you're like, man, I'm spending like over 100 points for this model that you know dies to a stiff breeze and doesn't really do any damage, but its effect is, hey, put 3 models back in a unit every turn. Um,
That is pretty good.
right.
Is that the big one, the big four-legged one?
No, it's actually one of the small characters. So there's 3 smaller characters. There's the Soul Reaper, which is right up here, and he's going to be more of your combat-oriented one. So if you want a character to run up and mow swaths of infantry down, the Soul Reaper is going to be your guy for it. But the Bone Shaper, I would hold him up, but I accidentally dropped him on the ground, and that's too far away right now. Um, but the Bone Shaper is the guy standing on the skull, putting together a new body for the Ossiarch Bone Reapers. Uh, he is a relatively non-combat solo, but he adds a lot to the army in terms of flexibility and attrition. So it is something to where he is vital on the battlefield without necessarily, like, if you're just looking at a stats perspective or points perspective, you're like, oh god, not worth it. But I honestly can't think of building a Bone Reapers list without at least one of those in there, to help keep the attrition swinging my way.
Right, because that's another consideration for people to have is, what is the niche slash what's the, I don't know, special gubbin that your,
Yeah.
force has. My words aren't with me today, but
No.
whatever your specialization is, does that amplify it?
Yeah.
So the units you're taking, or do you just keep on generalized, where if you have basic stat lines that are really good, you're rolling on those odds.
Yeah, and other things to think about. I kind of want to talk about this unit that's coming out for Bone Reapers in depth. Um, it's the Mortet Crawler. It's their catapult. One, it's a gorgeous model. Two, it's a siege weapon, and it's something that we haven't necessarily seen a lot in Age of Sigmar. So it is a very long-ranged, um, siege machine. So it has a minimum range, it has a very long maximum range. But to me, one of the benefits you need to think about of having those in your list is not only does it, you know, shoot things to death, but it stays in your backfield, which leads to several other bonuses. So this is like the battlefield rolls thing. Uh, so yes, it's going to be pelting enemy units with, screaming skulls and all that sort of stuff for the entire game. But it staying in the back prevents other enemies from deep striking into your back lines and basically keeping enemies from just teleporting into backfield objectives or your own backfield and wiping you out, just because those are huge bases that like to sit back. And enemies can't basically be placed within 9 inches of them. So if you spread three of them out, it can control a lot of your backfield, which prevents, you know, orcs or flesh eater courts or something like that popping in from behind, which is really, really important. Uh,
I didn't really think about that, really, but yeah, that totally makes sense.
and so,
And on top of that, they're just chucking,
yeah,
dice everywhere.
and so they're doing damage. They're preventing placement in the back, and uh, they give your opponent another threat to think about, right? So it's like, okay, well, I can't really place the models I want in the back, but I need to get back there to take care of those catapults. If not, they're just, getting free damage on units the entire game. Because it's very difficult uh, after like the first turn or two actually getting out of range of them because their range is so long. Um, so it's really important to give your opponent something. It's a threat to them. It's a problem that they need to solve, while it is also providing you with ample protection. So it's something to think about. And for 200 points, it seems pricey for a relatively rail catapult, but it, like I said, like it does a whole lot for you. And the fact that everything in the Bone Reaper's army can replenish hit points to it means that it's going to be around for a while if you can keep it relatively protected.
Now, what is that one, the big one that has on a 5? Is it a 5-up? You get a model back, even if it's from the enemy?
Yeah, so that's the Gothazar Harvester. So those are the big. Um, it's hard to describe them, but basically they're the big monstrous guys, and their job is to roam the battlefield, picking up corpses to make new models out of. And so, whenever a model I think dies within 3 inches of it, whether it's friendly or enemy, 5 up, you get to put another model back in the unit, which is really big. It is also designed to take on, a little bit harder targets because it can dish out mortal wounds or it can take on hordes by re-rolling all the hits against units that have enough models in it.
Well, and didn't they say something? There's a special rule in there about if you take out a model that has X amount of wounds, like 5 or more wounds, then
Mm-hmm.
it's a different, like you get basically more models back in your
Yeah,
unit.
yeah,
So you're not just wanting to attack hordes with it. You can
correct.
also attack things like the Beast Claw Raiders.
Yeah, and so the idea is to have the harvesters roaming around with your blocks of infantry, and once again, it gives your opponents a choice whether they want to go against the big harvester and leave the infantry block alone, or go against the infantry but leave the harvester alone, which might potentially add back more into the unit. So it, once again, giving, these are like back to the battlefield rules where like your blocks of infantry are there to mainly hold objectives, right? Uh, but like in any other game, your baseline troops are still competent fighters. So do you go for, when you're choosing targets, do you pick the specialized thing or do you pick the thing that's going to be gathering more points? And how to balance your attacks and your damage going between the two is going to be really important for fighting forces like this. And I think people will quickly learn whether or not that the harvester replenishes enough in the unit to make it a valuable target, or if it's one of those things where it's like, okay, well, if I just wipe out the unit of warriors, then they can't replenish any models in it. So let's go for that.
Right.
And it's something that
Yeah, and like
translates to a lot of other games too.
when you put that in conjunction with the special abilities, what do you think are some like the basic. What are the best types of special abilities to you? Things that are they buffs? Are they debuffs? Are they, you know,
Um,
things that you can do that can prevent your opponent from doing stuff better? Like, what to you? What are the kind of best kind of special abilities?
so generally, I have a tendency to play debuff centric factions, but it might sound weird. I think overall buffs are more important because you can always rely on your buffs making your models good. Uh, I was playing a game yesterday where I wanted to catch Itchy Nuisance, which made something fight last. Uh, Quickly realizing that I didn't necessarily care if any one of his units fought last, and that to me was just like, oh, I have a spell slot allocated to the spell that no longer is useful, or as useful as I would like it to be. Whereas if I had a spell that said, oh, hey, add a damage to your attacks or re-roll your saves or anything like that, it becomes much better than the debuff. So I generally prefer buffs to debuffs. There are some debuffs that are always good, like I think there's one in Bone Reapers where it's like, hey, if you roll 6 for a save, re-roll it. Um, which to me, that's a debuff that is always viable because every army takes saves, and it will overall add to the damage. But the Bone Reapers are for a death faction. You would think it'd be a bunch of debuffs or like making things worse, but like they are solely based on buffs. And I like defensive buffs a lot. So anything that gives me an additional save or keeps my models around longer are what I value a lot. Because at the end of the day, no matter how weak my model is, if it stays on the board, it still has a chance to fight and continue. Whereas, if it dies, then it can't contribute anymore for any reason.
Right, and that's the next thing, which is considering a quick strike versus long term. So you talked earlier in a broadcast here about your attrition,
Yeah.
right? So staying around longer. But then some people, depending on their play style, like with Drakari slash Dark Eldar, you might want to stick with how many wounds slash how much damage can you do right off the bat. And it's called alpha striking in 40k for those who might not know.
Yeah.
But that's a really big thing to consider, if you want to really put in a lot of damage first and how you can accomplish that.
And it pops up in a lot of war games, like other war games too, like War Machine and Hordes. The Alpha Strike is really important. So setting the momentum of battle. And so it's one of those things where you're, like you said, considering for list building, where it's like, okay, maybe my units are more fragile. Maybe I'm playing more of a tactical play style in terms of like precision extraction of enemy models. Um, you have to consider the range of armies you're going to play against and what's going to be most effective versus the largest range, right? Um, there are some things to where, you might just say, all right, I've built this list as best as I can to uh, kill off as much as possible to give myself the momentum to keep winning the game after the first turn. Um, but you may not be able to rely on all of it. I like building armies that can theoretically weather the storm and then come back and win through attrition. So I like playing against those armies, the Alpha Strikers, because I usually can keep going afterwards. Um, but that's something you have to plan for depending on your play style. You have to be able, like the Alpha Strike army relies on the tactician identifying what the primary threats are going to be to their army and removing those, and then cleaning up the chaff, more or less, right?
Yeah, and you can apply all that to skirmish games as well. So thinking about our upcoming Necromunda League at Giga-Bites
Yeah.
that Ricky's hosting. Has that started yet, or is that next week?
I believe it started yesterday, so
Oh, sweet.
I,
Okay, cool.
people might have been playing practice games, but I did see a bunch of games of Necromunda going. And for those that haven't seen our Necromunda boards, it was so great to see these like high towers of buildings with like ramps and bridges built across them. It was really neat.
It really is epic. And Necromunda, I'm actually in a league as well. It starts today for up here in Cincinnati, so it's a good time to play Necromunda for sure.
What?
Especially considering that next Saturday we have the big release of, is it Dark Uprising?
Yes, Dark Uprising is coming out, and for those that are interested, we're obviously taking pre-orders. It comes with a new book that has the the gangs in it, new dice, new bases, floor tiles, all that sort of stuff. But the up, uh, Dark Uprising box is the first time that you'll be able to get the corpse grinders, which are an amazing looking force. Uh, and they're kind of tempting me a little bit. I'm usually like lean towards the Goliath force, if you can imagine, after all we've talked about. But the corpse grinders are definitely appealing as well.
If you don't want the Palanites, I'll take yours off your hand.
Oh yeah,
Oh yeah,
maybe we'll.
they're so good.
I've just bought.
I've been painting mine as the Brotherhood of Nod. I'll see if I can
That.
show folks. I even found a head from one of my Space Marines.
That's so cool.
So he's like a modified cane. You can't even see that. I'm like, okay.
You
It's
need to
super
get
fun.
the little scorpion decal transfers.
I've been hand doing them.
Oh, you've been hand doing them? That's awesome.
It is terrifying, but there's a lot of heart palpitations involved in that process.
No,
it's about 25 to 30 minutes per like face, like, you know.
Yeah, but hey,
hand decaling it.
It's worth it.
It's very satisfying. I even got the little scorpion tail at the end of it, at the top, where it has that little like upwards curve.
Yeah.
I miraculously got that to happen. I'm not sure how.
That's great. That's really awesome.
But even skirmish games, you know, even with small amounts, you really still have to consider all of these things, because you can ultimately say, oh yeah, you know, 1,000 points, and you know, I want the thing that kills the best or whatever. But really thinking on strategically and what kind of abilities really help your playstyle. So for me, with Wild West Exodus, I have my two forces. I have the aliens / watchers is what they're actually called, but you know, you got to say aliens, like the dude in the History Channel, aliens.
Right.
Got to say it like that. And then I have the Union, and the Union is actually kind of a horde faction in a way.
Interesting.
They have a lot of like bosses and kind of heroes that are support guys, but a lot of them buff the regular dudes. So it is an army, literally an army.
Yeah.
So my aliens, for the same amount of models, I think I have half as many aliens as I have Union people.
That makes sense. And one of the things I like about skirmish games, as opposed to, games like 40K, Age of Sigmar, all that sort of stuff, is that skirmish games definitely rely on more synergy than the larger army games. And that's where like really list selection and list building definitely doesn't come down to just the points, right? It is, hey, these two effects work together in this new way that maybe my opponent isn't expecting, or provides a large enough problem to whoever I'm facing that they have to change what their plan is to go against it. And that's something I really appreciate. And War Machine and Hordes does that to a great effect. They're a very synergistic playstyle game where all these models have different buffs or abilities that can interact differently depending on the collection you're taking. And I know Wild West Exodus is the same way, and soon to be Lost World Exodus.
Yeah, that looks cool. A lot of those models look great. I want the samurais for sure.
And we should probably get Matt Blaisdell on here to talk about Legion list building, because once again, it is not necessarily all about the best bang for your buck point wise. There's a lot to consider, especially with your like whoever's leading your force can drastically change the effectiveness of your army. So,
and I play some Legion. I wouldn't call myself good at it.
right.
I do enjoy it for sure. I think my skill level is somewhere between like a Jawa and Luke before episode 4. Like when he's still whiny, you know, and every time something bad happens, I'm like, "Oh, come on."
I would definitely classify myself as a Gungan for Legion.
Yes. You kind of just throw stuff out there and kind of go at it.
Yeah, just throw things out there, wander aimlessly through the battlefield. And if I make it out alive, hey, that's great, but it probably wasn't through my own doing.
Nice.
But yeah, all these, it's really interesting to, like, it's definitely a big jump when you go from a skirmish game like War Cradle to something like 40K and vice versa. 40K to Wild West Exodus from War Cradle, excuse me. Because you have to change about how you think about points in general and roles in an army. Now, instead of having like a unit of 10 guys in a large mass battle game, one character will more or less be what was 10 guys in the other game. And they'll usually be able to have more rules than the larger game systems because you're effectively focusing on smaller groups. So it's a bit of a learning curve, moving from one to the other and identifying what is valuable to you as a player, not necessarily just through the points or how killy something is, right? I think everyone wants, especially starting out, you're like, oh man, I can do so much damage. Um, I remember there was a talk about like a Salamander's captain that could theoretically do like 6 or 12 damage per swing, but at that point, like you've already put so many points or so many resources into them, and doing 12 damage per swing doesn't necessarily matter uh,
That's a really great point.
as much at that point. So you have weighted down a lot of your force to something that is overly killy. Like you don't need to do that much damage in most of the game, right? Like unless you're fighting exclusively knights, why would you need to like hit something for 36 damage? Um,
Peter says Gungans were very capable. Jar Jar was banished for a reason because he's a Sith Lord.
yeah, we still have one more movie to confirm that, Peter.
I mean, as you think about it, if they only had blasters, they would be unstoppable because their shields are ridiculous.
Yeah.
They were stopping the tanks from hitting their, with their shields.
Yeah, no, it's very true.
If they just had blasters, those little ball things, I didn't quite understand, but
Yeah, they're like little like EM pulse grenades, it looked like.
yeah, but if they were like high explosives, they would have won instantly.
But if you live underwater, why would you have high explosives?
Depth charges?
Maybe.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with yeah. I'm gonna see if I can. Nothing I can do about that, but it would be a cool thing.
No, it would be.
I do have a crap ton of B1s that I've been building up.
Yeah,
It's ridiculous.
I am waiting for Gungans to show up in Legion. I don't know if it'll ever happen, but I'm waiting for it.
I imagine that there'll be support units, just like Naboo. Like there might be a Naboo, I don't know,
Guard.
Royal Guard or something.
Yeah, I hope so. But we'll see. Only time will tell.
It'd be great though to have an entire corps of Gungans.
Yeah, like I would love for Gungans, like their Gungan troops to be core, and then give their big shield beasts to be.
Yes.
It would be.
Well, did you see that people are doing they're doing the Christmas decorations, the little globe things, the clear ones?
Oh yeah.
And they're cutting off the bottom and sticking it on top of the droidicas.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. And then one dude even did like a half one
Yeah.
that was from the front. So it looked like it was deflecting. He put little like deflection things on there. It was like a marker of some sort.
That's so cool.
So it's literally like a front half of the shield was being hit.
No, I'll have to pick those some of those up because it's a really cool effect, to do, especially since it's like a plastic that's easy to cut. It's already rounded perfectly.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you pick up the Clone Wars set?
No, I haven't, because I'm torn between droids and clone troopers, and I'm literally waiting to see if Gungans are announced soon or not.
How much do you hate mold lines?
I really hate mold lines.
Then if you hate dealing with mold lines is one thing. If you hate the look of mold lines, it's go with the droids.
Okay.
Because if the clones, they're that hard plastic that FFG has, they've gotten better with it, but it's still ridiculous to try to scrape it off.
Gotcha.
Whereas the hips that the droids use, you can really easy. It's a lot softer.
Okay.
I do not recommend even dealing with the clones if you hate mold lines.
Gotcha. Okay. No, I can deal with it. But that's good to know.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we are approaching my time to skidoo and get the store open.
Indeed.
But thank you everyone for coming by and listening to us. Yeah, talk about points and what is good and versus not so good, or what you should be looking for, I guess is a better way.
I guess.
Yeah.
Great talk as always, John. Thank you, folks. Make sure you subscribe to our Giga-Bites TV YouTube channel. We have over 500 subscribers, and I want to pump that one up way high. So you can look it up, all one words, Giga-Bites TV. Subscribe there, notification and all that. Releasing tons of content, so it's great. It's good times.
All right. Thank you very much for coming by.
Bye, everybody.
All right. Goodbye.